Welcome to Shameless Leadership. I'm your host, Sarah Dean. This show is for women leaders who are committed to advancing both their own leadership and the leadership of those around them. In each episode, I offer practical strategies and inspiring stories to help you become a more confident, compassionate, and curious leader. The truth is, you were born to lead. So let's start now, together. Hello, Shameless Leaders. I'm so excited to be here today. And I'm excited about what we're going to talk about. I feel like this is a topic that doesn't get addressed enough. And I feel like there's also that this is a topic where you might not have much awareness around the fact that you're doing some of these things. And I think sometimes having awareness can help us find new behaviors and help us learn some behaviors that might be adaptive in other ways that would be helpful. So we're going to be talking about masking today and talking about the impact of women masking at work. And so masking is what we do when we are trying to maintain our safety, when we're trying to fit in somewhere, where we're trying to be maybe like people who are around us who have more power or control than us. And we want to make sure that like we don't get called out or we don't get taken to task in some way. So oftentimes we will adapt or adopt other people's behaviors or qualities of the people around us, even though they're not genuine to who we are, because this allows us to fit in. It allows us to be seen as one of them. It allows us to not stand out. It allows us to maintain safety. We do this for a lot of different reasons, and oftentimes it's completely subconscious. So I want you to think about if you have ever seen a young child at the end of a school day. And so I remember when my son first started preschool, and I would take him to school. And once he adapted, it took him a minute to get comfortable with preschool. But once he adapted and was excited to go and see his friends and his teachers, we would take him to school and be in a great mood. And I'd pick him up and he would be in a great mood. And then literally our preschool was across the street from our house. We were very lucky. And literally in the walk across the street, this child would transform before my very eyes. And he would go from being this just total delight to an absolute monster, irrational, inconsolable, crying and screaming and just nonsensical. It was a whole scene. And this happened over and over and over as we were settling into this new preschool routine. And I remember there was this one season, this multi-week season, where I literally would bring him in the front door of the house. He would just be this emotional disaster. I'd have him on my lap. And I wouldn't even try to talk to him, because if I tried to talk to him, it was it just made it way worse. And I would literally just feed him cookies. And I remember thinking, this is really bad mom behavior. I'm just reinforcing this behavior by being eat cookies. But what I found was he would come home really hungry, and he would be hungry and overwhelmed. And if I could just get a little bit of food in him without having to argue about if he liked the food or not, then he would eventually come around and settle down and become somewhat of his actual person again. So what we know about little kids is, whether you have this extreme preschool example that I had, or you have a kid who's maybe a little bit older, what we know is when we send kids to school, they're going into systems and structures and communities where they have to uphold all sorts of different rules all day long. They have to uphold rules. They have to be a certain way. They have to act a certain way. They have to sit still. And this takes a toll. It's really, really hard. And especially if you have a child who's neurodiverse or a child who struggles with some of these rules and expectations and structures. So what then happens is they work really hard all day. And you might even get information from teachers where they're like, oh, Johnny just does such a great job following rules, and he's such a good friend, and he's just a role model. And you're like, my Johnny? Because that's not the Johnny that I see at home. So this is often masking behavior, where we go into an environment and we put on our best front and we hold it all together. And sometimes it's really hard to hold it all together, but we make it through. And then we get out of that environment and we're just oh my gosh, we fall apart. We're emotionally exhausted. Sometimes we're physically exhausted. We're mentally very drained because we've been holding this all together, trying to uphold a facade for the whole day, to be I'm fine, I got it. I'm fitting into the structure that in many cases, especially for little kids, wasn't necessarily built for them to be successful. And we see this with women at work as well. And we see this whenever there's someone who's carrying a marginalized identity, trying to fit into systems that were not necessarily built for them to be successful. So when I'm talking to women, I often am in situations, especially if I'm talking with women in tech and women in sales, where they are either they're the only woman in the room or they're one of very few women in the room. And what we talk about is the fatigue and malaise that comes from having to be in these spaces where you're one of very few, if not the only women in the room. And you're having to navigate, like, how do I fit in? How can I make sure that my voice is heard? How can I make sure that I'm like speaking up enough, but not being too much? How can I make sure that I'm being assertive, but not aggressive? Like there's always these like fine lines for women to toe in terms of being present and being heard and being seen, but not being like, not taking up too much space, not being too loud, and all of these different kind of or stereotypes, I should say, and generalizations around like, how should women show up in a room that's predominantly filled with men? And this can happen. These masking behaviors can happen. I want to be really clear, in rooms where we don't feel respected and appreciated, for sure. But it can also happen in rooms where we enjoy the people that we're sitting with. So you might be masking in a room full of male colleagues who you might enjoy and respect and get along with just great. I was talking to a woman at an event recently, and a younger woman earlier in her career, and she said, well, I'm always the only woman in the room in my role, but like I love, like, the guys that I work with, they're all great. Like, there's no sexism or anything like that. And it's all fine. And I was like, that's fantastic. I love that you feel really comfortable and that like you fit in there, and like, that's all great. And I said, my guess is that at a certain point, when you have a different role or when you're in spaces that are not all male, you will be able to look back and see some things that you don't see right now. And not necessarily to say that like these men are being horrible and sexist, not at all. But because it's a room full of males, they just have a different bias in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different subject areas and subject matters that will impact how conversation goes with one woman being in the room. And so I said, like, I love that you're in this space right now and that it's working out great and everything. But I would like love to check in with you in 10 years just to see, what is your perspective when you look back and after you've had more career time in rooms of in rooms where there's more of a mix of genders, to see like, what is the comparison? How can you compare and contrast? So, and she was in agreement. She's like, yes, like that would be really, really interesting, because this isn't just about being in spaces where we have to uphold a certain facade because we don't feel accepted or we don't feel like we fit in. It's also when we do feel like we fit in, we still are in spaces where we just have the people around us are very, very different. So when a person is notably different from the majority of the people around them, they naturally mask themselves to fit in a few different ways. Sometimes this is to be taken seriously. Sometimes this is to prove themselves that like, I do know enough. I am qualified to be here. I am capable or competent. Sometimes it's to gain a competitive advantage. And you recognize like, if I want the same opportunities or I want to get where they are, like this is what I got to do. And then sometimes it's to maintain safety. Sometimes it's to maintain safety and fly under the radar. So there's a lot of different ways that this can show up for women in the workplace, and it depends on your environment. It depends on a lot of different components, but I want you to think through what this might look like for you, and then what are some of the implications. And so let's look at what this might look like. And as I say some of these things, you're going to be like checking mental boxes, right? And being like, oh, that's me, that's me, that's me. Or maybe this is you noticing this is someone else. And so you also might have colleagues where you notice how they mask in certain situations. And when they're masking, they're quieting or shutting down a part of themselves that actually really would have value to be showing up in the room. So maybe you have a colleague who, when you have like a one-on-one interaction with her, another female leader, she's just like energetic and boisterous, and she has these great ideas and she's open to sharing. And then she goes into a room of maybe leaders who are higher up in leadership than her, or maybe leaders who are mostly male. And all of a sudden she is more quiet, more withdrawn, more reserved. She doesn't share her ideas. And so this is about you noticing how you respond in these situations, but also noticing the women around you. Because again, like, let's always try to bring each other along and let's lift others as we are rising. And so it's not just about recognizing how we do this, but really recognizing how the women around us do this as well, so that we can support them in their growth. So you might notice an altering of vocal pitch or language. So this can be like someone making their voice a little bit lower to fit in. Maybe someone slowing down their cadence of speed or picking it up. Maybe it's using certain language. Maybe it's using like more technical language or more professional language, or like corporate speak, I would say. Like making sure that you're using like the right kind of lingo, because that's what everyone else in the room is using, even though these are like ways you would never talk in other rooms. You might notice modifying speech patterns to avoid feminine speech markers. So you might take certain pieces of lingo out, or you might take out certain phrases, and you might add in or substitute more masculine speech markers. And so maybe you say things that that other men in the room commonly say. I know that I've been in this situation just in spending a lot of time with a friend. I'll suddenly find myself saying like some of the little like just phrases that they say, because it's just exposure to these things makes you more likely to replicate them. So it's not even like doing something good or bad. It's just like dropping some of your own language and picking up someone else's language to fit in. This can look like dressing to look good, in air quotes, but also trying to be professional, well kept, not too showy, not too sharp, not too like buttoned up, but also not too casual. When I say looking good, it's looking appealing enough, but not being overly appealing. And this is this very fine line for women that like we don't have this luxury of doing the like Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs. Like, I just wear a different black t-shirt and a pair of jeans every day. That's generally not acceptable. Like women typically are like, wait, when's the last time I wore this outfit? When's the last time I was seen? And that might not be your situation, but we're dressing to fit a certain role way more often than men are. And we spend time, energy, and holy cow, a lot of money on that. Similarly, having your hair or makeup done in a certain way that suits the room versus suiting your comfort. So recognizing like, oh, I have to like, spend an extra 20 minutes every morning, like curling my hair or doing makeup a certain way, or like I feel like I need to look a certain way before I even walk in the room, which is oftentimes very different than a man who takes a shower in like 7 seconds and walks out the door, which I'm always very jealous of. Masking can also look like suppressing natural emotional reactions. So holding back, like you feel something and then you're like, oh, don't let that show. So maybe it's holding back vulnerable reactions. Maybe it's holding back, like not being too excited or not being too invested or not being too sad or upset or mad. It can be any emotion where you're like, I don't want any extremes to show, because another masking characteristic is maintaining a calm and demure demeanor, no matter how heated everyone else around you is getting. So other people, their emotions might be like starting to fly high, but you're like, I got to keep mine like tap down a bit, because for me to go to that level of elevated voice or volume or losing a little bit of composure has different implications than the man who's sitting next to me doing that. You might find yourself laughing at jokes even though they're totally inappropriate and you feel really uncomfortable. And I have been in this situation so many times, I think every woman has, where you're like, well, I'm not going to like get on my like feminist soapbox in the middle of a meeting, so I'm just going to let it go. And this happens a lot. You might mask by participating in meaningless conversations that you don't care at all about. So maybe you find yourself in the first 10 minutes like talking about football, and you're like, why am I talking about football? I don't care about football. Oh, like the last thing I ever want to do is talk about football. And here I am talking about football, or talking about technology, or talking about some other kind of male dominated hobby that you have no interest in, but the only way for you to be in the conversation is to pretend that you're interested, which takes extra energy. You might find yourself also avoiding or downplaying your own personal interests and hobbies because they're not relatable in the room. So for you to be like, oh, I'm taking these great Pilates classes, and then like no one in the room can relate to that, you just don't bother saying anything. You might find yourself avoiding or downplaying family situations. So maybe not letting people know what's going on in your family life, in your personal life, in your caregiving life. You maybe don't want people to know that you might be feeling really stretched thin because you don't want them to think that that's going to get in the way of you doing your work really well. You might mask by finding yourself positioning yourself as one of the guys. I'm just one of the guys. I'm just like you. And we uphold this image because we don't want to be overlooked. And so we're trying to just fit in like, I'm just like you, and trying to prove how I'm just like you, which can definitely take an energetic toll. Women often mask by over-preparing for simple things. So over-preparing for meetings and presentations, to be like very overly ready because they don't want to look stupid or foolish, because that would reinforce to the men in the room that like, oh, look, like we really shouldn't have women in the room because they're not that prepared or they don't really know that much. So we over-prepare. We also over-prove our competence and our skills. So we over-prove that we're qualified to be in a certain place or that we know certain things. You also might mask by avoiding asking questions or seeking help, or avoiding not knowing something. So instead of saying like, hey, I don't know what that means, or can you explain that more? We might instead take an extra 20 minutes after the meeting to like go look the thing up and figure it out on our own, rather than just asking the question right there where we could have gotten a 2-second answer, but we don't want to look foolish or incompetent or incapable. So instead we take extra time later to go figure it out on our own. And then you might find yourself masking by downplaying personal achievements or downplaying professional qualifications. So either not sharing them or blowing them off, like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Like, I got a master's from Harvard, but like, whatever, no big deal. Like, anyone can get it. It was, it wasn't hard. Or maybe you're downplaying personal achievements and not really letting people know, like, hey, like, I did a triathlon over the weekend. Oh my gosh, like, I've never done one of those before. And just downplaying and not acknowledging some of the things that we do. So what are the costs? What are the costs of all this masking? A handful of things. So first of all, this constant masking is a place where we are constantly trying to uphold the facade and not get caught, whether it's conscious or subconscious. So the costs of this: chronic emotional exhaustion and anxiety, an erosion of our self-esteem and our sense of self, either being in active burnout or on the brink of burnout very consistently, very regularly, very routinely. Reduced creativity and ability to be innovative. So we don't even feel creative because we've shut that part of ourselves down so much, or we're just so tired and burnt out that like we can't spark creativity and innovation within ourselves. Other costs might be missed opportunities to be collaborative, because when we're not shining as bright as possible and being our more authentic selves in these rooms, we are maybe missing opportunities for people to be like, oh yeah, Sarah's really good at that thing. We need to bring her along. So our ability to shine then can our inability to shine can then prohibit some of those opportunities. We might have the cost of lacking authentic relationships. So we're building relationships in the room based on this facade, not based on who we really are. And so at the end of the day, like, these relationships, they don't feel meaningful. They don't feel that valuable. They don't feel that like we care about them that much. They don't feel like they have a whole purpose for us, even though for everyone else in the room, they might have a purpose because they're able to be their authentic selves. And that lack of authentic relationships makes it hard for us to find meaning in our work and meaning in the relationships with the people that we work with. This can also have the cost of us being poor advocates for ourselves, for the people that we care about in our organization, for our ideas, and for the issues that matter most to us. This also can lead to isolation and loneliness, resentment, disengagement. And this is also a way that we are upholding, probably inadvertently, but upholding toxic and inequitable work environments. We are really standing for this behavior that we probably don't actually stand for, sometimes because we don't even know that we're doing it, but that we are inadvertently upholding by just being a smaller version of ourselves. So as I hinted at the beginning, one of the things that can happen is that we don't even know that we're masking. We don't even know that we're doing these behaviors until we are in an environment where we no longer have to do it. And then we start to recognize the cost. We start to recognize the outcomes, the things that we've been feeling or experiencing as a result of masking. And that can be a lot to internalize. Recognizing suddenly, like, oh my gosh, I was putting on, a bit of a show, or I was protecting myself in a certain way or performing in a certain way that isn't really indicative of who I really am, or that doesn't really allow my truest gifts to shine. And once we see that and understand that, we can't unsee it. And that is when we start to recognize, oh, wait, I need to drop the facade. I need to stop faking it. Even if the faking it, in air quotes, like, doesn't feel fake to us, it's just giving ourselves permission to amplify more clearly who we really are, and to be more transparent about who we really are, to be more transparent about all of us in terms of really living, leading, working all out with all of you in a way that you do get to shine, in a way that you do get to share your opinions, in a way that you do get to stand up for your ideas, that you do get to stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself and other people who are important to you, other people that you want to support, other people who you think should have a voice, and the ideas and the issues, again, that matter most to you. That is the key to your future as a woman leader, is being able to recognize, where am I, because of cultural conditioning, because of some of the spaces that I exist, where am I maybe unconsciously holding myself back? What are the costs of that? And then how can I do things differently, maybe better, moving forward? And that's really what excites me about the women that I work with, is that there's this like recognition of, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I was doing this and that was holding me back or keeping me playing small. And now that I know that, I can start to do things differently. So what can we actually do differently? I started building out group programs for women years ago because I recognized the power of bringing women together, especially women who tend to be in more male-dominated spaces, bringing women together so that they can learn with one another, so that they can grow together, so that they can lean on each other, so they can champion one another. And what I found is that when we start to be in groups of women in these capacities, that we then build a new sense of self or a different sense of self where we do really feel more emboldened to live all out, to like show up as all of you. And that can be really exciting. It can be a little scary and feel kind of different too, but it can be really, really exciting and really, really liberating. And sometimes this happens in small steps, and sometimes it's like a big leap. Sometimes it's recognizing that like you now want to show up different in the spaces where you've been for a long time, and that can feel a little awkward. And then sometimes it's recognizing, I don't even want to be in those spaces anymore. I want to be in a different space. I'm leaving. And so this can have a lot of different implications. If you are recognizing like, oh my gosh, I think I'm masking a lot and I'm seeing some of these costs, and now what am I going to do with that? So let's talk a little bit about what you can do, because there's a few things that you can do. So the first thing is recognizing when and where and how you mask. What are the specific circumstances that cause this behavior where you are holding yourself back in a certain way, where you are hiding yourself in a certain way? So is it when you're around certain people? Is it in certain contexts? Maybe it's only like in certain situations at work. Maybe it's not all the time. Maybe it's only if you're sitting next to a specific person. Maybe it is only in like very limited capacity, or maybe it is all the time. But and like this, none of this is about judging yourself or being self-critical. It's much more about just objectively noticing how this happens, when this happens, who does this happen around, so that you can see the patterns and that you can see what your tendencies are. Then you can start to look at a next step, which is beginning to unmask where it is safe to do so. So recognizing, where can I practice? Where are the safe places for me to practice being a more full version of myself? Where are the safe places for me to practice, like maybe not doing some of these behaviors that I felt like I needed to do, again, consciously or unconsciously, that I felt like I needed to do to fit in or to pass, to kind of get by, and then practicing showing up in a different way. And that can be vulnerable. It can be uncomfortable. You might even tell people like, hey, I'm noticing that there's some ways I've been kind of getting in my own way, or I've been holding myself back, or I've been quiet when I shouldn't have been. And I'm really working on changing that. Like, you can let people know what you're doing, again, in those safe spaces. When we start to unmask in safe spaces, we start to feel a sense of power and liberation that absolutely will carry over to the other spaces that maybe feel a little more tenuous or a little more daunting or intimidating. And it is practicing in safe spaces that gives us the tools, skill set, and mindset to then have the courage and boldness to go practice those things in those higher stake situations, or those situations where we feel like, I don't quite know how this is going to go. I don't know if, there might be pushback here, or it might be more awkward, or it might, this might be more challenging in this capacity. So again, practicing where the stakes are a little bit lower in order to gain the skill set and mindset to then practice in places where the stakes are higher. The next thing that you can do is finding places where you can be fully unmasked. And so this is often, with your closest girlfriends, maybe it's at home with your family, but looking at where are some of those places professionally that you can be fully unmasked. So are there women's organizations? Are there professional organizations or associations where you can just be in the room with all other people like you? And so I've recently been at a couple different events. I'm actually going to another one next week, speaking, where it's just rooms full of women who are like, it's never just me in a room full of women. Many of these women are saying, this is, it's always me and mostly men. And it's so different when we can get around other women, or we can get around other people that have identity markers that are similar to ours. And so finding those places where we can go in and we can be unmasked, oh my goodness, it's liberating, it's freeing, it's exciting. It's also really fun. Like, we just get to be this more comfortable version, and it can feel really, 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 really good. And sometimes we don't know how much we need it until we're there. It's a little bit like COVID. Like, we didn't, coming out of COVID, we didn't know how much we needed to be back in person doing things until we were actually in person doing things. And then we were like, oh my gosh, like, being around our people, this is like our lifeblood, right? And so finding those places and being able to connect in places that are where you can be fully unmasked with other women can be really, really transformational. And so finding those places is going to be really, really important. If those places don't exist, then giving yourself permission to create those places, creating places for women to be unmasked together. And so I'm going to give you a couple examples of how I've seen women do this. So as I said, I've been bringing women together in multiple capacities for years. Currently, I'm bringing women leaders together in my new leadership incubator, Align. And so if you are interested, if you're like, I just want to, like, I want someone else's container, like I'm raising my hand, I'm like, come join my container. So there's probably an ad in this episode talking about Align, but right now it's in March of 2025. If you're listening in live time or around when this goes live, we have aligned, my women's leadership incubator is open. And this is a 6-month leadership accelerator for women leaders. And in this accelerator, this is a place for women to be unmasked. This was my response to seeing what was unfolding in 2025 and recognizing like women need a place to show up, do some goal setting, advance their skill set, advance their mindset, but really be connected to other women, being championing other women so that there can be that 2025 can be a strategic year of growth and professional advancement. So I'm creating that space for you all if you want to come join my space or do what I'm doing and create a space. And so you don't have to do it in the same way that I'm doing it or with, the same method, but how can you create these spaces? So I've had numerous clients over the years see a hole and be like, hey, I'm going to be the person that puts this together. I've actually had multiple clients put together like women's walking clubs and just be like, hey, like we're meeting on Wednesday mornings. And sometimes it's in one capacity, it was just like anyone in the neighborhood can come. Another capacity, it was more specific to like women business owners, but putting together just a place for people to convene, a place for people to congregate and build community. So oftentimes it's not just like waiting for someone to build the thing for you or going and finding the thing, but giving yourself permission to build it yourself. I've had other friends do this, other friends and clients and colleagues who've done, building their own book club or knitting club or whatever the common interest is, letting yourself build the thing that where you're attracting in the people that you want to be spending time with can be really, really rewarding. You can keep it very low stakes. It doesn't need to be like a fancy, big, huge, like paid produced event. It can be like, this is just I'm creating this safe place for people to show up and come together. Maybe it's a dinner club. Maybe it's a hiking club. Maybe it's, it can be super chill. You can do this in a million different ways. So finding those places where you can create those opportunities for women to come together and be unmasked. So I hope this was helpful to you. My hope is that you will be able to recognize some patterns and then decide how do you want to strategically shift some of those patterns so that you can start to diminish the costs of masking in the places that you mask, so that you can get back some of that energy where you're protecting yourself and preserving parts of yourself and not sharing yourself all out. How can you eliminate some of those costs of maybe, increased stress or anxiety, or maybe not being as creative or innovative, not feeling like you're being your full self, and give yourself permission to go a little more all in on who you are and who you have the potential to be in those environments, to then experience some of the growth that can come from those environments and some of the gifts that can come from those environments. And if you do this and it doesn't go well, here's what you know that this is probably not the space I should be in long term. So if you try new things and you're like, I'm going to just be my more authentic self in this space and it doesn't work, then you have some really good data to show you that, I don't know if this is a place I really want to continue to stay. And I've done that. I've definitely challenged myself to, show up as more my full self in certain capacities and certain spaces. And it's not worked. And it's been this really clear message to me that like, this is probably a space you don't need to invest more time. And sometimes that's meant I can leave immediately. And other times it's been a professional situation where I had to wait until there was, a strategic time where I could leave and have a plan in place and like make sure I could still pay my bills. But having that information is also very important. Knowing that this is not the right place for me long-term is as important as going in and recognizing like, oh, I can show up more as myself and I can fit in and I can gain the rewards that coming with being my full self. So information either way is really, really valuable and really, really helpful. All right. I hope this was helpful. I love spending time with you all. I appreciate you being here. I can't wait to be back next week. And until then, know that I'm in this with you always. Thank you for allowing me to spend time in your ear today. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe to this channel. To learn more about my speaking, training, and coaching services, visit sarahdean.com. That's SARADEAN. I would also love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn at sarahdean.com/LinkedIn or on Instagram at sarahdeanspeaks. I love hearing from my listeners. Thank you for showing up for yourself today. I see you, I hear you, and I'm holding space for you today and every single day.